The biggest change in a generation in workers' rights is underway, but your attention might have been elsewhere. Welcome to The View. After all the kneecap headlines this week, you might not have noticed the news about the Economy Minister's big push for better jobs. But will it go to plan?
It's quite a high-wire act you've set yourself, isn't it?
Well, as I say, I really want to continue to engage with everybody involved so that they have the ability to shape what's going forward and that what we do achieve is something effective.
We are also looking at the kneecap controversy. The DUP's Peter Martin and commentator Chris Donnelly are live in the studio tonight. And we'll have time to bring you a flavour of our Red Lines discussion on the emerging runners and riders in this autumn's Irish presidential election.
She's got the legislative chops, but does she have the personality factor?
He was suggesting that President McGregor would do X, Y and Z once he was president.
Hello, the biggest change in workers' rights in a generation is coming, but will it be agreed and made law as quickly as the Economy Minister would like? Kiva Archibald launched her Good Jobs Bill at Stormont at the start of this week. It seeks to put an end to exploitative zero-hours contracts and enhance protections for workers. And she wants it in place within the next 2 years. Trade unions have welcomed it. The businesses have largely supported the intent behind it, though there are clearly big concerns over how things have been run so far. But I spoke to the Minister earlier and I asked her first about those reservations. How seriously does she take them?
Well, first of all, to say this is the biggest upgrade to our employment legislation in a generation. The proposals that I have made at the beginning of this week, I think they're ambitious, but I also think that they are balanced in terms of being effective for both employers and workers. We had a consultation last year, a 13-week consultation. There was extensive engagement with all involved, everybody that you would expect us to talk to in relation to these proposals, and what I have now made decisions around, I feel is a balanced way forward that takes into account both the needs of businesses and of workers.
But you've also got to take on board the key concern expressed by the business organisations who say large numbers of businesses don't even know exactly what's happening. That's not a great start.
So we had a consultation last year. The consultation was under 4 broad themes. And there was a number of proposals under each of those. We have now set out exactly what the decisions are in relation to those at the start of the week. And I appreciate there is quite a lot of detail in that, and all involved business organisations, trade unions and other partners will be absorbing the detail of those and understanding what it means for them. What I have committed to everybody is that I am here to continue to engage. I want to hear views. I want to have their input in shaping exactly what is drafted into the legislation.
You received a letter from senior business leaders representing the CBI, the IOD, the FSB, the Northern Ireland Chamber and Manufacturing NI. And we've seen that letter. And in that letter, those business leaders talk about the lack of effective engagement with various sectors and sizes of business and the absence of any extension to the consultation period. They talk about it proving impossible to engage effectively, and indeed it would appear that a large section of our community is not yet aware of the extent of these proposals. So you talk about 13-week consultation process, but it doesn't seem to have been very effective.
Well, you have a statutory consultation. Actually, the statutory consultation requirement is usually 12 weeks. We extended it for the purposes, one of which is outlined in the letter, that it was over the summer, to give people the opportunity to have their input. Officials engaged extensively. Conor Murphy, as Economy Minister at that point in time, had extensive engagement with a one-on-one and broader than that with business organisations.
But these business leaders are still saying that there are large sectors within business in Northern Ireland who do not know precisely what it is you are proposing.
So we have set out the proposals at the start of this week. I published them. I made the statement in the Assembly. Prior to going to the Assembly to make this statement, I had a round table with representatives from all business organisations, trade unions, third sector partners to set out the detail of the decisions. And the proposals have been published, the consultation responses have been published, impact assessments have been published. I appreciate there is a lot of detail there that everybody will want to work their way through. And as I said, I have committed to continue to engage because I want to have that input and shape on what's going forward, because it has to work for everybody. There are competing interests here as well. For me, as the Minister, I have to try and find a balanced way through that.
You've said that workers have had to wait for a very long time to see the changes that you're proposing actually brought into effect. The difficulty is that if the consultation process now is slowed down because of the way in which the department has handled it, that means that those workers are going to lose out even further, aren't they?
Well, I don't think that we intend to slow down the period in which we introduced this into the Assembly. We are moving ahead to continue to develop.
But you've got to bring people with you. You can't rush it.
And I fully intend and have committed to bringing people with me. But we have work to do to get the proposals into the Assembly. At the start of next year is when I intend to introduce it into the Assembly to get it through by the end of this mandate. And that's my objective. And what I have committed to is that as we bring this forward into the next mandate, there will be a phased implementation of the new requirements to give people the ability to be able to plan and to respond to them.
But that's when it could get very sticky because, as you say yourself, these proposed changes have to go through the executive. We know the DUP backs the business organisation stance. Philip Brett, who's the chair of Stormont's Economy Committee, said on Monday that as you get this through the executive, it's vital that you have the buy-in of that business community. So it's clear from their letter that we've already discussed that as things stand, you don't have a full buy-in there. So things could become very difficult.
And it's important to set out that the letter was sent before the proposals were published. I would hope that business organisations now will have the ability to reflect on what the decisions
Although you've
that
said
I've
yourself
actually
they were
made.
consulted during the process, so there can't have been too many surprises in there for them.
Well, the proposals that were set out in terms of the consultation were high level, and what I have now set out is the decisions that have been made under each of those. So some of the concerns that businesses had raised, including in that letter, have been addressed in terms of the proposals, for example, in relation to 0 hours contracts. So their concerns have been taken on board.
Well, not fully taken on board, because we've heard them on the airwaves. We've spoken to some business leaders as well who've highlighted some of the reservations that they have.
To be honest,
and 0 hours contracts is something that's been discussed.
The way that I have tried to approach this is to try and find a balanced way that is meeting the needs of both businesses and workers. So that is my job as Economy Minister, is not just to meet one set of needs, is to try and find a way that balances those. And I think that I have achieved that, and I think that my executive colleagues will hopefully reflect upon that in terms of the proposals as well.
Yeah.
Because in relation to, for example, 0 hours contracts, what I have set out is that we will end exploitative 0 hours contracts. So where somebody is working regular hours and is trapped in a 0 hours contract, they would have a right to a banded hours contract that is reflective of their working hours. But it also will be set out as some exceptions, a small number of exceptions, where there are genuinely casual or seasonal work. And that was an ask of business. So I have taken on board the concerns, and I think that I have found a balanced way forward.
Well, we could quote one example here, Hospitality Ulster, which obviously represents workers who work in a very important hospitality sector here in Northern Ireland. It wasn't part of that formal consultation process, has made that point very publicly, and says it is a sector that would be hugely affected by your proposed changes to 0 hours contracts. I mean, first of all, why was Hospitality Ulster not part of that process when you've just highlighted yourself the significance of changes to 0 hours contracts?
I think there's two separate things. So they would have had the ability to be part of the consultation process the same as anybody else. I think what Hospitality Ulster were referring to is the LRA-led engagement forum, and that is something for the LRA. What I have committed to as Minister is to ensure that I engage with everyone, and I have met Hospitality Ulster twice this week on both the Good Jobs Bill and on wider economic matters. So my commitment is there in terms of engaging on the way forward, and I think that business organisations will hopefully recognise that commitment and that I am standing over it at this point in time.
OK, what about the potential additional cost to businesses? And I know this is an issue that business representatives have raised with you, because business already is under an awful lot of pressure with additional costs, and we know what they are. Minimum wage, there's the talk about tariffs, there's the new national insurance levels, of course, which have just gone up a month ago. So there's pressure within the business community already. This will, they argue, add yet further pressure. And you can understand, can you not, those reservations?
Yes, and I have sympathy with businesses in respect of those concerns. And when I was Finance Minister, I commissioned research on the cost of doing business, in particular in relation to some of the announcements that were made in the Chancellor's autumn statement. And that research, I anticipate, will be published in the near future. So I very much hear those concerns. And as I said, what I have committed to is that as we move forward with these proposals and the bill goes through the Assembly, the implementation of them will be phased into the next mandate.
Interestingly, your initial plan is for carers' leave to be unpaid, but you made it very clear in your statement to the House on Monday that you would want that ultimately to be paid leave. There is a potential cost implication for business. You could understand them being wary of that.
So I guess the intent behind that would that there would be a statutory paid leave entitlement for carers as well, and similar to some other family-related leaves, and so that cost would be borne by the executive, and that is one of the challenges as to why we're not immediately moving to a paid leave because of the cost implications. And if in Britain they move to have a paid entitlement, then obviously the money would flow from the Treasury for that. So
there'd be no implication for business. All of that would be borne. So in relation
to carers' leave, I suppose we have to work through the detail of exactly what the type of entitlement would be, and that is something that we are still doing.
You want unions to have access to businesses with 10 or more employees. It's currently set at 25 or more. So that's a significant change. And while you clearly want to help workers to be as well protected and represented as possible, many of those smaller businesses, many of them good employers, I'm sure you would accept, say they simply don't have the staffing to run a business and to engage with trade unions. Do you accept that's potentially for them a big issue?
So I think it's important to recognise the benefits of having a workforce that is properly engaged as well. Workforces that are well engaged and listened to and respected are more productive, are more innovative. So there are benefits both for employers and for workers to improve workplace relations, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. And some of what is set out in the detail of the proposals is that we would be developing guidance as well in relation to workplace relations between trade unions and employers, so that we can improve the good relationships that are already there, and to improve where we need to as well in relation to how businesses and trade unions work together.
Are you saying, Minister, that the potential benefits of your proposals will clearly, categorically outweigh any financial burden on Northern Ireland's businesses?
Well, I think the intention certainly is that what we're trying to achieve here is something that is effective for both employers and for workers. And as I said, I believe that I have found a balance here in terms of the proposals that have been set out. I want to continue to work with both businesses, business representatives, workers and trade unions and other partners in this to make sure that what is being implemented will work effectively.
It's quite a high wire act you've set yourself, isn't it?
Well, as I say, I really want to continue to engage with everybody involved so that they have the ability to shape what's going forward, and that what we do achieve is something effective. OK. Your party's facing questions from opposition politicians about staying in five-star hotels while travelling on official business. And I just want to ask you about that. Matthew O'Toole again told the Assembly on Monday your predecessor, Conor Murphy, stayed in the Fullerton Hotel in Singapore on one such trip. And the hotel is described as reflecting the full-blown colonial confidence of its builders. Did that sting? Well, I think, Mark, when people go to book accommodation or travel for visits on behalf of the department, they don't always have the ability to choose exactly where they stay. It will be based on...
Of course they do.
They will be based on business need. It will be based on security requirements. It will be based on proximity to where it is that they are doing their business. So I think that we have to have, of course, always in mind value for money and public interest here, but also we have to, of course, be reflective of business need and what we're doing on behalf of the executive when we go abroad to do business.
Well, it's interesting that your executive colleague Andrew Muir from the Alliance Party stayed in 3- and 4-star hotels when he was in Brussels and New York. So it seemed to meet his requirements. Was he just lucky?
Well, I don't know the detail of either Connor's previous arrangements or Andrew's arrangements when he travelled. Certainly, I think that decisions have to be made based on both value for money and business need.
OK, let me ask you finally about the ongoing controversy surrounding the rap band Kneecap and those comments that the only good Tory is a dead Tory, kill your local MP. When you heard that reported for the first time, how did it make you feel?
Well, I don't think any of us would agree with the comments that were made, and I think they have rightfully clarified their comments and made an apology, and that was the right thing to do. I think what stings with most people is that they have seen this huge criticism borne on Kneecap for these particular comments, and the thing that Kneecap is most known for, beyond their music, is their really vocal stance on Gaza and Palestine.
So
and
up Hamas, up Hezbollah, was that right?
Well, they have clarified their comments in respect of they've clarified. They've made a statement clarifying their comments, and I think that was the right thing to do. But I think we cannot ignore the ongoing genocide in Palestine and the daily bombardment, the slaughter of civilians, the blockading of aid, and I think the international community has been lacking in respect of that.
There might be people who would agree with what you've just said, but who would also suggest that it is hypocritical of somebody from Sinn Féin to say that this band were wrong to say up Hamas and up Hezbollah because your party, Sinn Féin, has met in the past with representatives of Hamas.
Well, Mark, and I think here in this place, we of all people know that you have to engage with people to find a way forward and to find resolution to conflict. And I think people have to talk to each other to achieve that. And what we need to see in the Middle East is engagement. We need to see a ceasefire and we need to see engagement and negotiation to bring an end to the conflict there, to achieve a two-state solution that works for both Israelis and for Palestinians.
The Economy Minister, Caoimhe Archibald, talking to me earlier, and we'll be hearing from business and trade union leaders on Sunday Politics this weekend. Now, next to what many of you might think is the most important story of the week, even if many others may view it as a cynical recycling of a story to serve other agendas. It's Kneecap and that row over who said what and why. The DUP MLA Peter Martin and the commentator Chris Donnelly are with me now. Welcome to both of you and thanks for joining us tonight. Peter Martin, Kneecap have issued a statement apologising to the families of the murdered MPs Joe Cox and Sir David Amess and made it clear they don't support Hamas or Hezbollah. Has this story finally run its course?
Well, no, Mark, I don't think it has. I think the apology that was issued was half-hearted, and actually the families involved have said that as well. Katie Amess, whose father David Amess was one of the ones who was murdered, one of the MPs, said after the Kneecap statement that it was a deflection, excuses and gaslighting. It was absurd. That's not an apology. It's deflection. It's not taking accountability. It's making excuses. Those aren't my words. Those are her words. So I think it hasn't run its course yet. Let's be clear. They made some clarification around some of the comments that they have made. However, saying up Hamas, up Hezbollah, those comments are currently, and for that matter, the kill your local MP are currently being investigated by counter-terrorism police.
Yeah, well, they're certainly being investigated by the police. We've had that confirmed today. It's complicated, though, isn't it? Because Kneecap's social media X account this evening posted a story from The Guardian last March where it reported that the Conservative Party donor Frank Hester said in 2019 that the Labour MP Diane Abbott should be shot. And that clearly poses a question about proportionality, because supporters of Kneecap might well ask tonight why Mr Hester wasn't criticised to the same extent that members of Kneecap are being held to account for their comments.
Well, Look, I would want to be clear about this. I wouldn't stand by the comments you've just read out. I think we have to be fairly clear about that. I'm here to talk about NECAP.
Yeah, but it's about proportionality. I mean, we're not discussing the rights and wrongs of it. Most people would say these comments, most right-thinking people would say these comments were wrong. Both of those comments were wrong. Yeah. But the focus, interestingly, in the wake of what Frank Hester said, wasn't on his comment about Diane Abbott being shot, but whether or not the Conservative Party should keep the 10 million quid he'd given it. Yeah.
Well, look, these comments, as you've rightly said, are heinous. They've been reported in the press very recently. I think part of that is because NECAP are not used to a worldwide audience, Mark. They have been at Coachella. A lot of people have got interested in them, and this has all surfaced. And I think the reason that there is so much focus on this is that in the last 10 years, 2 MPs in Westminster were murdered, one by a far-right extremist and one by an Islamic fundamentalist. And Brendan and Katie have both come out very recently, made very clear their views about what NECAP said, about the hurt that's caused. I'm not going to speak for them, but as I said in that statement from Katie, she is really, really clear that whatever they said in their apology was half-hearted and not sincere. And so they need to do something more, at least for those families. The separate part of this story is what the counter-terrorism unit regards in terms of the law. But I think for that, I think they need to clarify what their apology.
OK, and just to be absolutely clear, Mr Hester's company last year issued a statement in which he said he was deeply sorry for his remarks. He abhors racism, and a spokesman later told the BBC that statement is not a confirmation of the quotes that were carried in the Guardian newspaper. It is, Chris Donnelly, a very complicated issue, but you've just heard Peter Martin say that the apology that NECAP issued was half an apology, and that the various issues we're discussing this evening are still being investigated by counter-terrorism police. So this is not a story, in his view, and clearly in the view of many other people, that has as yet run its course.
Well, where I would agree with Peter was on 2 things. Well, firstly, I would agree, and you made the point earlier, Mark. I think the comments was an off the cut quip, and it was inappropriate. And it was appropriate, I think, that they did apologise, and they did apologise in a statement.
So all of those comments were a mistake. They were wrong. Well,
I think, yeah. I mean, they take at face value exactly what was said, but look at their apology. Look at their statement too. They have apologised. Now, we're living in a place where I can tell you a hell of a lot of bad things have been said. Sectarian, inflammatory comments, not least by figures in the DUP. Not always been accompanied by apologies. Politics has moved on. So I don't think we're in a place to be saying to people, no, your apology is half-hearted, we want more. There is an issue of proportionality.
Well, you are if you think the apology is half-hearted.
Well,
you want
people
more,
can
especially the families of the 2 dead MPs have a particular place in this debate, don't they?
And of course, we've seen where we are here, there have been apologies issued by the state and others at different times. Families will make comments, but again, wider society will look at it often maybe in different ways. But I will tell you this, and I think this is really important. Peter's right to say that there's a wider audience looking at this, and he referred to Coachella. That's the context of these comments. That's the context of what's being contrived at the moment. What you're seeing is people, particularly in America, who saw a band that were brave enough to come out and issue a really explicit statement attacking Israel for the genocide that's taking place in Gaza. And the response to that has been, I think, symptomatic of what you're seeing happen in America, where students are being thrown out of universities, where professors are being removed from their posts, people are losing their jobs, because for the first time ever, there's a ground-up movement in America that is saying what's happening, what America is complicit in supporting the genocide is wrong. That is the ripple effect of what NECAP have caught themselves up in.
And that argument has been made by a number of individuals commenting over the past number of days.
A number of bands.
Yes, and there's been a letter today signed by a number of very high-profile bands and individuals in the music sector who've made that very point as well. There is another view as well, which you must be aware of, and I want to put to you now. There's a danger that by saying what they said, the comments for which they have now apologised, NECAP have served only to undermine the very cause they seek to promote.
Well, I think when you're talking about saying what they say, you see, the other part of this is, I think, the comment you made twice during the introduction about Some people might see this as the most important story of the week. I see this as the most important story of the week because it reveals the media framing that goes on. Because I see a front-page headline in the Irish News today about 4 senior DUP politicians who were within hours of the Pope dying at a Loyal Order parade in Lisburn, where a band mocked the Pope by playing No Pope in Rome, a song which you'll probably be familiar with the lyrics of it. They envisage a world extinguished, where Catholicism has been extinguished. Why is that not being talked about?
Well,
why do we not talk about apologies? When Carla Lockhart issues statements saying words matter, language is important, why is it that that is not something that is regarded as significant? You see, and this is where we're talking about media framing.
Let's put that to Peter Martin. There's no question about it that the No Pope of Rome song mocks the Catholic faith. The Billy Boys includes the line, "We're up to our knees in Fenian blood." It's all there in the Irish News for people to read today. How do you respond to what Chris has just said?
Well, before I get to that, could I pick Chris up on one thing? And he was talking about how NECAP's modus operandi is to highlight the war in Gaza and what's going on there. Well, let's look at a parallel. Let's look at Vietnam. And in the Vietnam War, there were lots of bands, Bob Dylan, Creedence Clearwater Revival, who wrote protest songs about the war, very effective songs, but they didn't call for the murder of any US senators. So, I mean, I completely support freedom of speech, freedom of the press. There's ways of highlighting things that are going on in the world, right? Rightfully so, but you don't call for the death of MPs or senators. So that's the parallel here.
So that's the point at which
you can draw attention.
The line was crossed for you.
Absolutely.
Okay,
you can draw. I have no issue with them draw attention to the conflict in the Middle East. Absolutely fine. And that was done during Vietnam, and it was done by artists, and it was done by musicians, but it wasn't calling for the death of US senators.
Okay, well, let's bring you back, if you don't mind, to the point raised by Chris there, which is that story on the front page of the Irish News today about the fact that 3 senior members of the DUP were at that procession in Lisburn on the day that the Pope died, where those songs were sung.
Yeah. Okay, so if you want what the DUP believe about the context of Pope Francis' death, in the Assembly on Monday, there was a chance for all Assembly members to commemorate Pope Francis. We were there. Emma, one of my colleagues, Deputy First Minister, gave a very heartfelt speech, a very genuine speech about Pope Francis. It was very warm towards him. That would be our response in terms of the Pope's death. Clearly caused a lot of heartbreak and pain for a lot of Catholics, not just here in Northern Ireland, but across the world.
OK, and the DUP had to condemn, or later condemned, what it called the distasteful actions of the bands involved in that procession in Lisburn. But you can see that there are clearly people, readers of the Irish News, presumably, and others, who find it perhaps hard to understand precisely why those individuals were there. And why are those songs being sung in 2025?
So you're completely right, Mark. 3 of our members, 3 of our MLAs were there. But it was a parade.
There's no suggestion, by the way, they did anything wrong.
No, I understand. It's worth clarifying that. Yeah. If I go to the 12th in July, and I go to the 12th with my family, and we're watching a parade, which we do every year, and there's a band walks past, and they play a tune that might have offensive lyrics attached to it. I mean, I don't think it's legitimate to say, my wife or I are somehow responsible for the band that just walked past and played a tune with no lyrics on it.
What's your point to Chris? It's not the same thing. You're not comparing like
it's not the same thing. And
okay.
I honestly think it's a bit of deflection because, in all honesty, NECAP are saying this is a big conspiracy. This is a smear campaign. It's not because they have said all these things. I think what Chris is trying to do is deflect from the key message here is that NECAP are in the eye of the storm because they called for the death. They called for the death of members of Parliament, and that's why they're in it.
But they didn't seriously. His point and their point is that they weren't seriously calling for that. It's not to be taken literally. You have to see it, they say, within the context of that performance.
Well, they have a massive worldwide audience. They've got 150,000 followers on Twitter. As I think Spider-Man's dad said, with great power comes great responsibility. They need to own up to what they've done. my view, Mark, is they need to meet with Brendan and they need to meet with Katie and they need to apologise rightly to those two families.
So you're deflecting?
No, I'm most certainly not deflecting, because I think the way this story has rolled out here in our own local context has brought those other issues into it, because the response from, for instance, Carla Lockhart, a colleague of Peter's, has been to say she's written to American Border Control to say that they shouldn't allow them into the country. She said they shouldn't receive public funding. Jim Rogers, I think the most senior Ulster Unionist councillor in Belfast, has said they shouldn't be allowed to play at Boucher playing fields. Yet we know the Orange Order is holding Orange Fest in Belfast City Hall's grounds this year. Now, Peter has just said himself, he knows that if he goes to watch the Orange parades, there's going to be bands who are going to be up their knees in Fenian blood. Yet, why are we never think of the significance of that with regard to all of these issues of public funding?
I think there would be a big fuss, though, if somebody stood up on an Orange Order platform and said the only good Tory is a dead Tory, or the only good whatever political representative is a dead version of that.
Well, first of all,
kill your local MP.
I think we started this by saying, I said it was right to apologise.
Yeah.
But we also know if you go through comedians, list of things that comedians say. I mean, a lot of the comedians.
Yeah, but NICAP aren't comedians. I mean, they tell. I mean, you know,
a movie which is a comic movie.
Well, here's the difficulty. NICAP members want to be taken seriously on the big issues that they say matter to them so much. At the same time, apparently, then they want people to accept certain other comments are meant to be taken as a joke. I mean, which is it?
No, I think. Well, firstly, I started this by saying I think it was right that they did apologise.
Yeah.
And I think that has been clear all along. But I think that what you're going to find in terms of the modern world, celebrities from the pop culture and will make comments on popular issues, on topical issues across the world, and people do appreciate that because they do have that platform.
But when they step over the line, they need to be held to account. Here's an interesting point, Chris. Indeed. The former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn's been criticised in the past for comments he's made about Hamas, referring to its members as friends. Now, he's explained what he meant by that many times over the years, and since the group's October the 7th attack on Israel, he's clarified he sees that as a terror attack, and he is no supporter of Hamas. Now, NICAP and Mr Corbyn, you might say, appear to share a similar political worldview. So if Jeremy Corbyn has opted to step away from Hamas, why would NICAP stand up on a stage and shout up Hamas and expect to get away with it?
Well, I think the context of that was clearly, I mean, they did make a comment in their statement as well, saying that we do not support any attacks on civilians. But if you want to go into the history of the Middle East, you want to talk about Hamas and Hezbollah, look at the history of it. Both of those are products of Israeli terror. You would not have Hamas if you did not have Israel treating the Palestinians the way they did. Hamas grew as a response to frustrations within Palestine over how they were being treated and the inability of the Palestinian Authority to manage that, to counter that.
And that's an argument. And there will be people who will disagree with that.
Lebanon. So, there are historical contexts to these. And I'm not saying that as I agree with both organisations, but let's look at the role of Israel.
Peter Martin, a final comment. Really careful, Chris, because you're heading towards some sort of level of justification for Hezbollah or Hamas, and that's dangerous territory to get into. Let's bear in mind, October the 7th, they murdered 1,200 civilians. I think we wouldn't want to go near the territory of saying, well, they're just a product of, or we have to put. We heard this after October the 7th. They're just a product. The fact of the matter is, they're terrorist organisations, and
Israel's a terrorist state.
We disagree with that, but the fact of the matter is that NICAP expressed support for two prescribed terrorist organisations and have called for the death of MPs. Okay, we've got to leave it there, folks. No meeting of minds, but an interesting illumination of the subject, I think it's fair to say. Thanks both very much indeed. Thank you. For now, in November, President Michael D. Higgins will leave Ars Nochtran after 14 years, and attention is beginning to turn to who might succeed him. A number of high-profile figures have said they'll make announcements in May on whether or not they'll contest the election. I've been to Dublin for a Red Lines discussion about the potential contenders and possible front-runners, and here's a short flavour of that conversation. One common trait that you might see among a lot of the Fine Gael front-runners, such as they're perceived, is that they're all lifelong legislators. But there is that secondary unspoken role of whether you want this person to basically be an ambassador-in-chief for the country. And often it's very difficult to find someone who might have the personality and the likeability factor, who also has the apparent body of experience as a legislator behind them. Michael D. Higgins seems to at least strike that balance because he was seen as something of a cultural icon, as well as having spent 30 years in Leinster House.
has Mairead McGuinness spending 10 or 15 years in Brussels and Strasbourg. She's got the legislative chops, but does she have the personality factor? That's, I think, one of the reasons why people speak about Heather Humphreys, because she's broadly seen as being very likeable and she's got a large body of Irish political experience behind her. But then, is there the aptitude? So there's so many different boxes that you have to tick to be a credible candidate.
Were Bertie Ahern to be a candidate, would the electorate be asked to reward him for his peace process service? You know, it brings back this question of what the presidency is for, or would he be able to outline a narrative for a politician of his generation, how he would reinvigorate the presidency?
Or would it reopen that whole debate about why he had to leave office?
Of course it would. Of course it would.
Because you couldn't go past that.
Yeah. Sinn Féin would like to join up with a sort of joint candidate of the left or an independent candidate. Now, whether the likes of Labour Party and Social Democrats are inclined to join forces with Sinn Féin in that regard is another matter entirely.
The one name we need to mention is Conor McGregor, the MMA fighter. Is he a credible candidate?
With a spectacular ignorance about what the role of a president actually is, because, you know, he was suggesting that President McGregor would do X, Y and Z once he was president, which of course is not...
Which he would not have the capacity.
Command the Dáil, convene the Dáil, dissolve the Dáil, sack the following people, none of which he can do.
Well, that's just a flavour of the discussion, but the full conversation is on our Red Lines podcast, which is available now on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. Peter and Chris are still with me. I mean, a question to you, Peter. Should people in Northern Ireland care about who the next President of Ireland is?
Well, I think a lot of people in Northern Ireland may care about it. It wouldn't be something that would overly exercise me, I'd have to admit.
Well, you don't care about it, and you're probably happy to go on the record as saying you don't know a great deal about it at this stage. Is that?
It wouldn't be something.
Is that accurate?
It would be. It wouldn't be something I would follow particularly closely. The elections in the South, I do, and they're probably more interesting. But in terms of the Irish presidential election, it wouldn't be something I would be watching very closely.
Okay. The man who gave his Assembly seat in North Down to Peter Martin when he became an MP last July, Alex Easton, says anybody from Northern Ireland, Chris, who wants to vote in the presidential election should up sticks effectively and move to the Republic. I presume that's not a sentiment that you would particularly agree with.
Well, if I was to say that anyone who wanted to have the Queen, King as their head of state, they should take themselves over to Britain, I would be rightly condemned for that. It would be regarded as a sectarian comment. And that's what Alex Easton said, and it's very unfortunate.
You see his comment as sectarian?
Well, it's basically saying, if you want to be Irish, take yourself off down south.
I'm sure he wouldn't say it was a sectarian comment, not meant to be a sectarian comment.
Well, he's treating people who are Irish citizens in the north as if they are second class in their own home.
But what he's saying is, what he
specifically
said is, read the statement in detail, what he's basically saying is the Irish president has no constitutional role in Northern Ireland, so it is a political irrelevance.
It's not a political irrelevance because he shares this place with people who are Irish. In fact, the First Minister is Irish. I'm Irish. I think Peter respectfully said it's not of interest to Peter as a unionist, but it is to me as his neighbour. So I think, from my perspective, I think Peadar Toibin has introduced a bill for me too in around looking at the issue of Irish citizens getting the vote. It's going to be too late this time.
Yes.
I would like to see movement on that referendum. I think that's important. But I think we really need to clarify from different political parties where they stand, because it's a parity of esteem issue.
Right.
And it should be acceptable across the board for people to say that they respect the right of Irish citizens to vote for the Irish president.
Mairead McGuinness from Fine Gael seems to be the front runner at the moment, but there are no declared candidates and we don't even have a date for the election. Just very quickly, should Sinn Féin run a candidate in your view? Because the party has done badly in the past.
I think that it's something that they'll be looking at. Maybe if their polling numbers go up, they'll get more confident, but they could look for a broad left candidate and come in behind that person.
If they could all agree on the left on such a candidate. We've got to leave it there, folks. Thanks both very much indeed. You'll be pleased, Peter, no more questions for you. As well as the full Red Lines podcast conversation on Sounds, you'll get a good flavour of it on Sunday Politics this weekend at 10 o'clock on BBC One Northern Ireland and iPlayer. But that's it from all of us, from everyone in the show. Thanks for watching. Good night.